Okay, in this video, I'm going to go over how to use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. And let's talk just real briefly about two things. What is the quadratic formula? And then what is a quadratic equation? Okay, so the quadratic formula, real briefly, is this. You may remember this from previous classes, but x is equal to negative b plus or minus, and that's what this symbol means, the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, where do those letters come from, and what do they mean? These letters come from the quadratic equation, okay? Now, the quadratic equation, the standard form of quadratic equation looks like this. ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to y. And you can see that the a, the b, and the c are what they call coefficients. Let me write that down for you real quickly. Coefficients. And each of these coefficients has a specific name. Now the a is the coefficient in front of the quadratic term. Okay, so it's known as the leading term. And the a is actually the leading coefficient, okay? Again, it's in front of the quadratic term. The b is the coefficient in front of the x to the first. This is called the linear term. And finally, the c is what they call the constant. So the quadratic formula basically takes the quadratic coefficient, the b, which is the linear coefficient, and then the constant, and uses the relationship between those to solve for where the x is. And remember that in a quadratic formula, you are solving for a parabola. So you have the possibility of getting two different x's, depending on where your parabola crosses. Sorry, let me just put that off screen there. Depending on where it crosses the x-axis, okay? Now, what I wanted to do in the rest of this video was to show you some examples of how these types of problems are presented, because they're not always directly in this standard form. So your job is to get whatever they present you into the standard form so that you can break out the a, the b, and the c to put into the quadratic formula. Now let me show you what I mean by that. Let's look at the first problem. Now, the first problem says this: 2x squared plus x is equal to 10. Okay, so we're going to try to get this into the standard form where it's the x squared plus the x plus the constant, and that's going to be equal to 0, because you always want to set the quadratic formula equal to 0. Okay, so to do that, this is fairly easy in this first one. We're just going to subtract 10 from both sides, and you're going to get 2x squared plus x minus 10 is equal to 0. Now, break out the a, the b, and the c for me. The a here is 2. The b, notice that there's no number in front of the x. Well, there is actually, and it is just a 1. So the b is 1, and the c in this one is negative 10. You could put the a, the b, and the c in this quadratic formula, and you would solve for the x's, okay? And I'm not going to do that because the purpose was just to show you how to convert it to the standard form. Now, in this second one, it's a little bit more complicated looking. Notice I have x squareds on both sides. I have linear terms on both sides and no constants. So let's go ahead and see how this one would work. As long as I set it equal to 0, I should be okay. So I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides. So I'm going to get 3x is equal to 3x squared minus x. Now again, I want to make it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So I get 0 is equal to 3x squared minus 4x. Now, where's the a, the b, and the c here? Well, the a, again, is the quadratic coefficient. So a is going to be equal to 3. The b is the linear coefficient, and that's just equal to -4. Since there is no c, c is just 0. Okay, so you would put 3, -4, and 0 through the quadratic formula, and you would solve for that answer there. Okay, now let's look at the last one. This last one's even more disguised. I basically have the factored form of a quadratic equation. So I'm going to have to FOIL this so I can get my quadratic term, my linear term, and a constant. Let's see what happens. X times x is x squared. X times -4 is -4x. 2 times x is plus 2x. And then 2 times -4 is -8. And that's equal to 3. Gather my like terms. X squared minus 2x, because when I add those two together, I get minus 2x. And then minus 8 is equal to 3. Now, you might be tempted to say that the a is 1, the b is -2, and the c is -8. But remember, it has to be equal to 0. So I need to subtract this from both sides. So I get this. Minus 11 equals 0. Now I can actually do my a, b, and c. A is 1, b is -2, and c is -11. And those are the 3 numbers you put through here. Now, what I'd like you to do for a little exercise is to take all 3 of these ABCs, put them through the quadratic formula, and come up with an answer for me, okay? And I'll give you the answer in another video. But the last thing I'd like you to do is to see if you can actually do this one on your own as well, all right? So change this to the standard form, get the a, the b, and the c, and then put it through the quadratic formula. Okay, hope that was helpful.